Welcome to the Lighting Effects and Reflections course. In this first chapter, we're going to take a look at lighting effects, three different things. How to work and modify with the source radius and size, IES, and light functions. The level we're using for this is the level called Lighting Effects, which you can find in lighting_rendering, and then effects and reflections, start assets, and here's level lighting and effects. Now there's three different things we want to do in here. We want to use the light functions to create water caustics underneath the water surface over here. Then we want to use IES profiles to create a more interesting shape for the light over here, for the spotlights. And before we go there, we're first going to talk about the source radius and length. And we're going to do that by modifying the light we have over here in our kitchen. Now this light is a little bit harder to see, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this light over to in front of the TV, because what we're interested in is seeing the reflection of the light in the TV, because it's going to become very obvious exactly what's happening. If you look in the properties of the light, then you can see there is a section here called source length and source radius. Let's start with source radius. Just enter 64 or so, and you can see you get a big yellow sphere surrounding it. This is the source. The source is the object, the model in a sense, that emits the light. So it's this sphere, this surface of the sphere that now emits the light. You can see that in the reflection in the TV as well. The reflection gets bigger. Play around with the numbers a little bit. And likewise, if you bring this back to, say, source radius 4, and you set source length to, I don't know, 64 or so, you get more of a tube light. And again, you see that in the reflection too. And again, play a little bit with the settings, see what you can do. But you see what's happening. So setting up the lights like that is ideal for tube lights. Like we have a very simplistic tube light here underneath the kitchen cabinet. If you would want to light the this type of light, you would modify the source radius and the source length until it matches, I think 192 or so in length is about correct, until it matches the model, in order to get the light emitting surface to better correspond to that, and to get the reflections too to better correspond with the visual model of the lamp. So that's source radius and source length. Next up we have IES. I'm going to use it on the spotlights. You can see if you scroll through the properties here, there's a section called light profiles, and that says IES texture. In fact, you can select an IES texture. There's only two things to pick from, and we can start off by taking the strange one, because it shows very clearly. The strange one is there. It looks very strange, but it's there to clearly show what it's doing. And I'm going to duplicate this light for a second just to be able to move the light around and just show you how it changes what it's doing. This works best on spotlights. Because the IES will be projected, if you place this on a point light, it might be projected very strangely. So again, this works best on a spotlight, and it allows you to enrich the shape of the light and essentially change the intensity across its surface. In this case, the intensity has been changed in a very weird way. We have two big and very noticeable rings. But if you switch this back to the complex one, you see what you would actually expect to get. You can very clearly see, if you look at the wall here, you get different bands of intensity, which enriches the lighting and which can make the lighting appear as if it's properly interfering with the gloss. So the gloss that the light has to go through from the lamp itself is modifying the way the light is cast on the environment. That's an IES texture. You can create IES textures not in the editor, but you can create them using free external tools. So if you search around a little bit on the internet, you will find some free tools to modify and create your own IES textures, and then you can simply import them in the content browser, and you can use it to enrich your lighting. This works on both static, stationary and movable lights, but if you set it to static, it will gray out the ability to set an IES texture, but it will work anyway. So if you simply set it first to stationary or movable, then set your IES texture, then set it back to static, it will be baked into the light map. And then lastly, and I would say the most powerful of all, there is a light function. So we're going to create water caustics underwater here using a light function. A light function means that you blend a material with a light. So the light that is being cast is actually a blend between a material and the light itself. This requires a special material that has been configured to be a light function material. That's the material we have over here. So you can see there's a material prepared here called Lighting Effects Caustics. We're going to open that material up. And what we're getting then is this very basic setup. You essentially just have the texture here. This is the texture we're going to use for water caustics. And we'll start with a very simple setup where we simply connect this to emissive color. I connected the red output simply because we don't need the full RGB output. It's a great texture anyway. We then need to configure the material to be suitable for light functions. You can do so by clicking in the empty space. So you get the main properties here of the material. And you see here material domain is surface. It shouldn't be a surface, instead it should be a light function. Doing so, you can apply it or save it. Save also automatically applies, but I'm just going to do apply. And I'm going to move the window out of the way a little bit. I'm going to go to lights and spotlight. Drag a spotlight in. We're going to make sure the spotlight is set to movable. See, it's set to make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. It's set to movable. And you might want to disable shadows because again, shadows do have an impact on performance, and in this case we simply have no need for any shadows, so disable shadows. And then here there is a section called light function. Light function expects a material. I'm going to say this material over here that I have selected goes into this slot. So I press the arrow to take the current selection from the content browser, and you see what happens. It blends the material with the light. So we're well on our way to create a water caustics. But we're going to make it a little bit nicer. So we're going to modify the material a little bit. Let's say that we'd like to change the scale. So we're adding something called a texture coordinate. What I'm doing here, by the way, expects that you have at least basic understanding of the material editor. So if you do not, please refer to the material editor courses first. But we're adding a texture coordinate. Then I'm going to add a panner. May link it all up. The texture coordinate I'm going to set to 5. So the texture tiles a lot more. And the panner I'm going to set to some speed, let's say 0.1 or so will do. So it's moving continuously. Then I'm going to duplicate these three, just Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, copy paste. And in the texture coordinate of the duplicate, I'm going to set the scale to 6.6 and the speed to 0.8 or so. It doesn't really matter. Just take some value. You can tweak it later on if needed. You multiply them both together. Again, using red and red. And then in order to make sure we have a bit more control over the contrast, I'm going to add a power. And the power is going to be set to 1.5 in constant exponents. And then because that's actually too dark, we're going to multiply again. And we're going to multiply with factor 10. So times 10. And that's the eventual output. And what we have now is this. I'll put it on a box. So it's not perfect. You can tweak a little bit with these settings and change the contrast, change the brightness, and change the scale and the speed. In fact, the 0.8 I typed, I'm going to do 0.08, which is probably more correct. Now we get that, approve that, and let's take a look in the level. And those are basic water caustics. So you could then place these lights around. You would probably increase the cone angle of the spotlight a few times, and then you can duplicate it a couple of times so the whole pool gets filled up. I'll show you the finished level in a second, but that would be the rough idea. Light functions are ideal for anything that requires some kind of more advanced effect and animation within a light. You cannot do anything with color. So if you would have done something with color here, that color would not have shown up in the light function, but anything else would work great. So examples of this are fire flickering. If you have a campfire, the light is slightly animated and flickering, slightly moving around as well. That's something that was ideal to do with a light function. Another example of light functions are the shadows of the clouds in the sky. You could create a light function that has a cloudy texture just scrolling by all the time, and then put that light function on the directional light itself, and that will result in the entire environment appearing to be shadowed by the clouds that are continuously scrolling over the world. So those are some really nice examples of that. To show you how it would look if you would put a little bit more time into this and tweak the effect a bit better. Here we have the finished level called Lighting Effects Finished. You see the IES in action here. You see the modified source radius in action here. And outside here we have 3 different spotlights, and they have a light function. You see that it has a bit of a better scale, and you can see what kind of effect is possible by doing this. So here's the material that we used for the water caustics, but it's essentially exactly the same. So we've gone through lighting effects, which means we've taken a look at source radius and size, IES, and light functions by creating a water caustics effect.